as the Chicago Bears look to build around Justin Fields. They have Darnell Mooney and Chase Claypool as the building blocks at wide receiver, but is either one a true number one receiver? Do they need to add a number one receiver this offseason? Or can they get by with a lot of guys that are more like 2s and 3s, but just trying to add even more of them?
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today and hopefully every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. On the show today, we'll be joined by Matt Waldman from the Rookie Scouting Portfolio to really break down the team building process here at wide receiver, looking at what the Bears have, what they need to add and complement with Darnell Mooney and Chase Claypool, and let's not forget Kmet in this equation as well. And we'll kind of get a sense of, how much of a difference maker these guys can be, what the Bears still need to add, and what the possibilities might be this offseason in looking at this passing game as a whole. It's a lot to get into with Matt. He's one of my favorite guests to have on the podcast. Really a thoughtful and just profound football mind that I could talk to for hours and hours, and we end up going a little bit longer than we might normally hear on the podcast. So let's jump right in. We're joined now by Matt Waldman, the author of Matt Waldman's Rookie Scouting Portfolio and a senior staff writer for Football Guys. He's breaking down the NFL draft, the fantasy football industry, and in particular, in fantasy football being the wide receivers, the skill positions, the tight ends, the running backs, quarterbacks, and that's what I want to get into here today. Matt, first of all, thanks for joining us, man. How's this season been for you? How have you been enjoying the ups and downs of just what's been a weird year all around?
Well, Lorin, first, it's always great to join you. I always have a good time, having conversations with you, even from way back when. And the season's been a lot of fun. It's always fun when unexpected things happen. And to me, one of the most unexpected things that happened was that the run game was resurgent like it hasn't been for about 10 or 11 years. And you kind of knew theoretically that it was a possibility that it would come, but it's kind of like those blizzards. They say it's going to be a cold winter, and then you actually have the blizzards. You're still shocked by it when it happens.
Well, we know it's a cyclical NFL we've seen over the years, and it's cool to see that come back around. The Chicago Bears have certainly been at the forefront of that with the quarterback running game here, but some of that's just been a necessity for them and not having the passing game to balance that maybe the way that they'd like to, or the way that they wish they could. And that's really what I want to get into here to today is philosophically from a team building standpoint. In Chicago, it's all about tearing down and rebuilding up from the foundation of around Justin Fields at this stage of the process. And particularly at wide receiver, we see the Bears add Chase Claypool at the trade deadline. I guess let's start there. I know you'd done a lot of work on Claypool over the years. Where do you sort of see the evaluation of him at this stage of his career? What is he and what can he still be?
Well, let's see if we have any Bears fans left wanting to listen to this after I talk about Claypool. No,
No.
But no, seriously, like Claypool is obviously we see the size, the speed, the quickness, all the physical traits are really on display with him. And certainly he can run after the catch. It's about putting it all together for his game, because after watching him in Pittsburgh, the first 6 to 7 games, I did an analysis on him. And what it really showed was that while his production was great in that early part of the season, and that's what we know about the narrative with Claypool, is like he started on fire, he just kind of petered out and then never really got back to that level. And what happened? And what happened is that teams were focused first on Juju Smith-Schuster and Deontay Johnson, and they were rolling either their coverage over there or they were making sure that their zone defenses were focused on the zones where those two receivers were first before that guy who was maybe adjacent to Claypool would go over there. Or when Claypool was in one-on-one situations, defenders were like, I know he's tall, I know he's fast, but he's not going to get to that ball on the boundary. I'm not going to play him so tight that I might interfere with him. I'm not going to have to give that extra to really get him to win. He's not going to earn that ball. And of course he would, because you've got to cover him. I mean, he's an NFL receiver and he's an athlete. But what they found was once they started to make him the focus and they got more physical with him, especially at the positioning point to make the catch, he couldn't transcend that adjustment. And then the combined with the fact of the quarterback play in Pittsburgh, the offensive line being diminished, the changes to the scheme to try and work with that, he never really built on those things. So the questions still remain. Can he win against primary cornerbacks at the catch point and position himself well to win the ball? Can he run all the routes you want to get open against primary defenders to do that? He can certainly get open in zone. So I think with him, you get a nice feel for that he can be a good component to your offense that can create and be a big play component, as well as a guy who can get yards after the catch for you, and certainly has the size to block. You can't be a Pittsburgh Steeler wide receiver and not know how to block. So he adds that element, and he certainly fits into what the Bears want to do from the run standpoint. But the concern is he's not really a primary receiver. If you ask me, he's got the same predicament as Kenny Golladay. Now, if you guys saw Kenny Golladay in your division, but you guys probably all know, who are listening to this, if you watched the Bears face the Lions, that while Golladay had a lot of good stats, or had a couple years with strong stats, he had Golden Tate on one side and he had Marvin Jones on the other, and they were both in their prime years, and they could put Kenny Golladay one-on-one against a linebacker or a safety in the middle of the field, and he could use his physicality to win matchups on a limited number of routes. But he wasn't the primary guy who would beat that defender, who was the top defender, man-to-man, press coverage, 3rd and 12. You've got to win that route. He's not going to do that. Like DeAndre Hopkins on a Jalen Ramsey, or DK Metcalf even, somebody like that. Well, Golladay went to the Giants, and you could hear Golladay this year saying, I don't understand why they're not playing me. I mean, they paid me to be a primary receiver. But it's in his mind, and I don't blame him. It's in his mind that I got paid primary receiver money. Why aren't they letting me be? But the year before, he wasn't playing like a primary receiver, and he's never really been one. But he was enabled by contract and free agency to think that was reinforced in him to be that when he never was. I'm afraid that Claypool may have the same belief, like, I'm ready to rock and I'm going to be this guy that I've shown some promise of being, but he was never really that guy in the first place. So I think the Bears need more than just him.
Yeah, when the way you describe that there with him thriving with other guys around him like that, like it brings the broader question, like, do you need a wide receiver who, like you said, DeAndre Hopkins one-on-one with Jalen Ramsey? Like, it's very nice, and of course, if you can get it, you'll take it. If there's a receiver in the first round or whatever, absolutely. But with a Bears receiving core with a guy like Claypool that maybe has some of those limitations, and we didn't get specifically in on Darnell Mooney, but Darnell Mooney's not the traditional mold of a number one wide receiver. Do you need one of those guys, or can you build a receiving core of a guy like Claypool that's not going to be that one-on-one guy, and that maybe Mooney isn't going to be the beat Jalen Ramsey guy either? But if you have 3 or 4 of those guys, Jalen Ramsey or whoever can only cover one of them, and then you're going to get either Claypool or one of these other guys in those favorable matchups that they have been productive in.
In theory, I think you can. Now, in practice, have we seen it? You could argue that the Kansas City Chiefs have kind of done that. They went away from Tyreek Hill. But if you say that their primary guy is Travis Kelce and that he beats cornerbacks, then that kind of takes that away. You could say the Detroit Lions are kind of close, because would you really say Amon-Ra St. Brown is a guy who's going to face Jalen Ramsey on a regular basis and win as much as, say, DeAndre Hopkins? I don't think so. As good as Amon-Ra St. Brown is, he's more of a zone beater who isn't going to win deep a lot, but he can do a little bit of everything well. And DJ Chark is nice, but he's more of a Claypool Galladay guy, maybe a little better if you ask me in terms of where he could go with his upside, but Claypool has some of that upside. They got rid of Hawkinson, who might have been one of their better ones. So I think they might come close, but I don't, there's Jameson Williams probably has something to say in a year or two about whether or not he will be a primary guy. So I think the answer is it's important to have one, but you don't have, but it's, theoretically you may not need one, but I think it's still important that you need to have one, just from the standpoint that it's not only just about putting one guy on them, but it's about putting one guy and maybe putting a safety over the top or bracketing or doing some work where the zone rolls over to a side, and that creates the opportunities for the other players. So unless you're just really strong across the board and they have overlapping strengths with maybe one area where they're unique in their strength, separated from everybody else, and that's hard to build those combinations. I don't know if, and in application, I don't know if it's as plausible as the theory.
This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's super easy to create a free job posting on LinkedIn Jobs, and they have simple tools like screening questions that make it really easy to focus on the candidates with just the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you want to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality candidates versus the leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. This episode is brought to you by Audible. Audible is releasing a new slate of football podcasts that I know you're going to like. That's why you'll be able to find a sneak peek of Think Like a Champion, available right now as a bonus episode on Locked On Presents. Think Like a Champion is a brand new podcast from Russell Wilson and Audible. Russ is a champion on the field, but off of it, we rarely know the grind on the path to greatness. Russell Wilson and his co-hosts dig into how high-performance athletes, artists, and leaders push the boundaries of their potential. You can hear two-time Super Bowl champion and MVP Von Miller deliver sharp insight about performing at your highest level in moments of extreme pressure. Or you can hear NCAA champion Tim Tebow talk about how to find your unique personal mission in the world. Each episode features interviews with Olympic medalists, NFL stars, and business leaders. Available for free on Audible or wherever you get your podcasts. So head on over to Locked On Presents for a sneak peek of Think Like a Champion, or catch the full series available anywhere you get your podcasts. Available everywhere now. Audible. Get in the game. Do you think it's less about the skill set of the specific wide receiver? The DeAndre Hopkins type is the example used. Like, is it less about specifically whether he's or how big he is, or specifically how fast or how, what combination of skills he has? Is it more about how the defense perceives him and how opposing defensive coordinators and coverage schemes are going to attack him than it is specifically, what that quote unquote #1 wide receiver is and isn't able to do physically? Like, it's not that they need to meet a specific set of criteria to qualify as that guy, but the main criteria is just how defenses attack them or prepare for them.
Yeah, for receivers, it's not so much physicality in terms of athletic ability is a baseline. But once you get to the baseline of that, you're good enough to be on the field in the NFL, then it comes down to technique and concepts. And there are a lot of guys who have, primary wide receiver 1 type athletic ability, but they don't run as large of a route tree as you need them to. Or they don't really understand. They're not always consistently on the same page with their quarterback when it comes to zone coverage. and understanding where the openings are going to be, reading the adjustments late pre-snap, early post-snap, so that you can make sure that you run the correct route with what the quarterback's thinking. A lot of that happens, or being able to create off structure efficiently with your quarterback when your first route doesn't break open. These are all things that some wide receivers have, many contributors have, but it's only your primary guys that oftentimes may have all of that, plus the fact that if you put somebody one-on-one against them who's their top corner, on any given play, they can beat that guy and flip the field. And I think that's, the athletic component has a part in it, but the big part is, are you reliable on the mental, conceptual side of the game, and have the craft to execute all the different types of demands of the game plan.
So putting aside for a moment, like, Claypool and Mooney and what the Bears have, that's pretty much what they have under contract next season, them and Velus Jones. But even looking more like broadly and generically, if you're going to build your ideal realistic NFL wide receiving core, not of like specific players, but like what combination of skill sets do you look for? I know our mutual friend Matt Waldman ascribes to like the basketball team theory of like, you kind of want a different combination. You want your center, you want a big guy, you want some smaller, fast guys, and some combination there. What works as far as a group mixture in the NFL? Do you need a variety of skill sets, or do you just need guys that can get open and make plays? Like what's the requirement there?
I mean, I think that it depends on your offense and what you're looking for, because some offenses, maybe you're not gonna emphasize the ground game in terms of the perimeter run game as much. So maybe you don't need guys who have a certain level of physicality. It's more of a nice to have as opposed to an essential to have. And especially if you're going to throw a lot more than you are going to run. But I think really on the whole, a nice to have nucleus of receivers would be, you want someone who is either big and tall enough or a great leaper and physical enough, because it can be Calvin Johnson or Steve Smith. It doesn't matter. One just jumps high and maybe is more ferocious than the big dude himself, but so you need either or to be someone who can be a ball winner. I think a ball winner in tight coverage and against contact is very important. So somebody who can do that. I think you definitely need at least a couple of players who can get yards after the catch in the shallow game. So in the shallow zones, they catch the ball, they can get first downs for you, so that they can be kind of an extension of the run game, so that you can do things with screens and RPOs and quick throwouts and audibles that allow you to exploit holes in the defense early. You definitely want your prime. I think a primary receiver is important from the standpoint of that you need a guy who can be either the primary guy or whether it's your X or your flanker, who can be really great at. You need at least two guys who can be really good at route adjustments, even if it's a slot receiver. So like someone who really is going to be on the same page, that you can move around, and he's going to read the defense on the same page as the other guy. So I think you need probably at least two guys who really can read the defense on the same page that the quarterback reads it and make good route adjustments. You need one who can probably, who can outleap and win the tough plays in the middle and at the boundary. You probably need at least two players who can win after the catch. And a lot of the things that I mentioned, one of them has to be able to do it all, I think. And then you have to have everybody else who can do at least one of those two things. And ideally, as a baseline for me, I want everybody. For me, if I'm in a room where I'm drafting players, I want a player who can take contact at the catch point. I want, to me, that's valuable. I want tough players who can win after contact. And that's probably the more valuable thing from that. The problem is that teams also have to account for filling their special teams roles. So sometimes they're drafting guys later who they wouldn't make our club if they were wide receivers at this point. Maybe they'll grow into that. unless we give them a very small role. But man, can they return kicks? They're great punt returners or they're great kick returners. And that's where they have a chance to make our club right now. And then they might kind of go a little softer on the requirement for what they need from a receiver. And then suddenly they need that player as a receiver. And they aren't quite up to the standard of what you would need from them. So yeah.
Yeah. How do you work the tight end into this consideration of like how you want to build an offense? I mean, obviously it kind of depends on the skill set that you have at tight end, but like, do you just need 5 pass catchers period that can fit these different roles or have these different skill sets? Or do you have to approach how you look at tight end as a pass catcher differently than how you approach wide receivers based on how defenses might defend tight ends differently than they'll defend receivers?
Yeah, you got to look at it differently and it's really so custom to your offense. Because if you're a play action offense where the run game is really important, well, you want a tight end who at the very least can beat a linebacker up the seam with the help of play action. If they can do that and get that intermediate seam between the linebacker and below the safety, then you've got Cole Kmet or you've got Dallas Goedert. Goddard might be a little more than that, but Zach Ertz, another good example. They aren't going to beat you 40, 50 yards down the field, but that's okay. They're going to be able to, if you establish the run well, and they also can block, so it's believable that they may be blocking down, then they can get up that seam in that first 7 to 10 yards, get the separation and have a step on their defender in the 15 to 20 yards up the seam. That's the biggest vertical shot that you're going to see from them. The rest are sit down type of routes or crossing routes that's fine. You can use them in that capacity. But at the same time, you have to consider how much you want to use them as blockers, because there's only been one Rob Gronkowski in quite a long time, a player like that who can do everything. Well, Kittle may be on that level, but they've both been banged up a lot. So how realistic is it that we're going to have a guy who can do everything and play season after season? The argument is probably not. There's only one Iron Mike Ditka. So when you look at it from that standpoint, I mean, it took years for anybody to even threaten his rookie record as a receiver, but you need someone. You're going to need at least 2 tight ends in your offense, one who can block when needed, but you're not going to run them into the ground doing that and get them hurt, and another who's really your other offensive lineman, but he's good enough as a receiver to then create matchup problems that teams don't go. Because like you'd always hear people say Lee Smith, the I think that's his name, who played for the Bills and for the Falcons a little bit. Yeah, who everybody's like, well, he's such a great blocker, but you knew that he was only going to get open 2 yards downfield and maybe gain 1 as a pass catcher. I mean, it's hyperbole, but he's not much there in that guard, even if he can catch. You need someone who at least, like when you look at, you look at Martellus Bennett and Rob Gronkowski together back in the day, or you look at Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith when they played both. Both can block, both can get open and catch. One may be better than the other as the receiver, but it's plausible that defenses have to honor that at least. So however you balance it, you need that. And then on top of that, you have to look and see whether or not you want to play 2 tight ends. And if you don't, then is that guy going to be more of a receiver for you? Is he going to be more on the wing, in the slot, or split out wide? And so there's really like a lot of different sub roles for that position that makes it hard to just answer in a pat way, as a result of that.
Yeah, or you could be the Lions and you could just send Penei Sewell out on a route and throw it to him for a first down.
Yeah, and like I was saying today, if you're maybe not smart, because if you're smart, you're going to try and tackle them and you're going to try and cover them because this is how you get paid. But if you're a wise person and you find yourself in the middle of a field and you see someone that big running that fast at you, you better run with them, because whatever's chasing him is going to be too scary for you to want to stay and find out.
Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at BetOnline.net, your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis, not just on your Chicago Bears, but across all of sports. The latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season, basketball, and the World Cup. They've got it all at BetOnline.net. Right now, the Bears are 9-point home underdogs against the Philadelphia Eagles this weekend. The over-under set at 48.5. Expecting a high-scoring game between these two teams. If you like those odds, BetOnline is going to be the fastest and easiest way to fill all your betting needs. So head on over to their website today or use your mobile device to learn more about all the different trends and action happening each and every day. BetOnline, where the game starts. That was bringing me to this idea of Cole Kmet is I found that in Chicago, I think we've struggled to evaluate him and understand like where expectations should be. That we know young tight ends tend to be slow to kind of grow into their roles. We don't see a lot of rookies produce at a high level there. But even into a second season and start of the third season here, like we still weren't sure. Like he catches it when he's open and he can make some catches. And he's a decent blocker, but we're so spoiled by the likes of Kelsey and Kittle and some of these guys where you're like, if your tight end's not that, it feels like, well, maybe he's just kind of closer to average and not that much of a difference maker. But at the same time, like scheme can make, especially, in a Bears offense that's been running a lot of play action and having him sneak behind linebackers, he can be more of a difference maker because of the threat to block. So it's a roundabout way of asking, like, how do you evaluate tight ends like this that aren't runaway? No, they're not Kyle Pitts, right? They're more that traditional style of tight end, and it's not the high ends of pass catching ability and blocking necessarily.
They're you look at them, they're like Hunter Henrys of the world. They're like, and part of that is Austin Hooper, and you think of players like that where they can be effective, but it also comes down to their quarterback. And we got to give Justin Fields a little bit of a break and say it's year 2, new offense, second new offense in a row. You're still going to have some growing pains. You have a new scheme. You have a new cast of characters at wide receiver. So part of it is still getting comfortable with that. People like to say, well, they haven't had till training camp, but you got to understand with football that after the first 5 or 6 weeks, defenses do make adjustments. They like to take about 4 to 5 weeks to get the scouting reports together before they really start to add layers of things into their game plan. And they don't add it all at once because they know that some of the things that one team did, they might not have the personnel or scheme to do. So they're going to try selected things because they don't want to. Also, if they try everything and throw it all out there, they might fail miserably and lose some games big time, where they'll say, we're going to stick with our scheme, add in a couple wrinkles. And then the teams that play that offense later, they benefit from seeing those layers added on until they get a book on them. And that's why, like, maybe week 13 or week 14, suddenly an offense that was hot is like struggling. And so I think that with a guy with and then it takes these teams, and then it's up to the offenses to kind of respond to that and adjust. And this is really their first year in this offense running it. So how they adjust and respond with a new coaching staff, you kind of got to give them a mulligan and say, look, year 1, it's probably not going to be pretty. They may have some successes there, but year 2 is when we're going to see if they've been playing well enough together. They're the main people are going to be there again next year. It should be okay. So when I look at Kmet, he hasn't screwed anything up majorly. He's been a decent blocker. Like you said, he catches the ball when it's provided to him. He's not a matchup player. Like, I look at players as scheme players and matchup players. And it's a great way to look at it for like fantasy football as well as regular football. A scheme play. Yeah. Cause a scheme player, it's intuitive. You know that, like, if the team creates play action throwbacks or play action passes or screen passes or anything where the guy who's catching the ball is the main primary target and really the only player in the progression for the most part, and they're putting all their resources to getting him open. Well, that's if he can execute on those, that's great. But very rarely is he going to win when you say 3rd and 13, we're putting their best coverage safety on him, one-on-one or the cover corner, and he's got to win this ball. And if you're like, if you can't envision him doing that and you're saying, yeah, he could do that easily, like every play, he's going to win the majority of those, he's not a matchup player. And there are very few matchup tight ends in the NFL. So the fact that the matter is he's a good scheme player who can occasionally make some matchup plays, but you know this, and therefore, unless somebody comes around where you get the opportunity to get someone way better, you're happy with what you have in Cole Kmet because he executes to the game plan. Now you just need your quarterback to maybe find him open a little bit more often on the second or third reads. Maybe you need an offense to create situations where you can make the most of him in situations where you can scheme things up, or you're happy with what it is and you realize that what we really need is to get more out of our wide receivers.
I want to circle back real quick. I know we're running along on time here, but we sort of established, okay, Cole Kmet, more scheme player than matchup player. Chase Claypool, more scheme player than matchup player at this stage. Darnell Mooney, more scheme player than matchup player at this stage? Or I mean, I know it's a spectrum. It's not black and white, but where do you sort of see him? We don't have to go too long on this, but where do you sort of see him on that spectrum?
He's higher than both the other two guys, but he's not quite there as a matchup player. And I think part of that is, to me, I live in Atlanta. I've seen Taylor Gabriel play. He reminds me a lot of Taylor Gabriel, which is a good smaller receiver who plays tough, who works hard. He's got a little more going for him than I think Gabriel had. But you guys had Gabriel too in Chicago, so So there's to me, he's maybe a souped up version of Taylor Gabriel, which means a little more dynamic, maybe a little bit more upside to his game overall. But that's the thing. I mean, I look at the Bears right now, and it would be nice to see them have somebody who's just a kind of a combination of those three players, at least enough that you can look at it, a little bit differently. And I think Velus Jones is one of those kick returner guys that you go, he can really return kicks, and maybe we can get creative and use him in the passing game on the run. But when the reality strikes of what that is, and every team knows what you're going to do with him because that's all he can really do, it doesn't work that well.
Yeah. And that's why it seems like a big focus this offseason on what the Bears are going to do to keep building around Justin Fields, perhaps, first round pick, maybe at wide receiver. I mean, we'll see, second round pick, maybe. And certainly if Bears fans want to learn more about these receivers and tight ends and running backs in this upcoming draft, Matt Waldman, your rookie scouting portfolio is a great way for people to learn about that. Can you let everybody know a little bit more about the project? I've been a buyer every year now. It's a really important part of my pre-draft process, and how that works and what people get when they purchase it.
Well, I appreciate it. It's now in its 18th year. So the rookie scouting portfolio is a draft guide, 2-in-1 kind of draft, pre-draft, post-draft guide that can be both. It's both an NFL and fantasy resource. I've been a fantasy writer for 20 years, but also I've been doing this for 18, and it is the second most purchased independent draft guide by NFL scouts and personnel people in the league, according to at least people I talk to in college football, like director of recruiting at SMU, Alex Brown, who visits with these guys on a weekly basis and has told me just that. He said yours is one of the 2 most purchased guides that I see in the hands of people who use it as a cross-checking device. So it has a real football value to it. And what you get is in the pre-draft, you get at least 150 evaluations of players. And I have my own process for doing it. That's rooted in best practices that I learned in a career before this, where you can see everything, how it's defined, how it's graded, where each player stands. And I kind of take you through the process of building the evaluation with each player and do it hopefully in an entertaining way. And I think it has been in that facet. And then you get a complete scouting report on the player in great detail. And you get to see the checklists that I use. So if you wanted to learn how to do this yourself and really wanted to put in the crazy hours that it takes to do it, you could do it. It's just about the work, so I show people how things are defined, why I define it the way I do. And then I give you, the basic reports that you see with everybody else, but they're just in more depth. And then also with the post-draft report, you get a cheat sheet where I update my rankings versus the average draft position of what I've noticed in leagues during the week after the draft, because it comes out within 7 days of that. I monitor leagues that are hardcore leagues and show you where, I may have rated Nick Chubb number one or Patrick Mahomes number one. And other people had them as, second round picks. And I'm not telling you to pick them number one overall. I give you like a sweet spot that says, here, I know where everyone says this guy is. This is where I think this guy is. You can get him here and still get an extra player. This is the point where you do that. So I do that. I give you a newsletter from June through December that gives you updates throughout the year of my rankings, as well as previews for the next year's class. So you get all that for $19.95 right now through December 22nd. That's my early bird period. And most people say it's worth at least $50 to them. And they often, my people who subscribe stick around. So a lot of them tell me, I'm not paying that discount. I'm waiting until I get till that passes, and then you can pay $21.95 for it. Still, it's a good deal. And I've been also giving money back to an organization called Darkness to Light. Since 2012, we've donated over $55,000 to that organization since then.
Wow.
So d2l.org is the site. It's an organization devoted to training people on how to prevent sexual abuse of children, as well as how to deal with the problem when it is reported, so that extra trauma is not layered into the process of trying to help the kids and inadvertently doing that. So it's a great organization. We're very proud of what we've been able to do with it. And again, you get your fantasy football fix, you get your real football fix. And, I'm grateful that I get to do this for a living. You can find it at mattwaldman.com.
Excellent stuff, Matt. Again, I can't vouch for it hard enough. It's, like you said, most thorough and transparent draft guide I think out there, and a great cause on top of it, and a great guy behind it, Matt. Really appreciate you taking the time with us today, and I'm sure we'll circle back around at some point in draft season and talk to you again soon.
Look forward to it.
Thanks again to Matt Waldman from Football Guys and the Rookie Scouting Portfolio for joining us on the podcast today. I hope you learned a lot. I know I did, just being a part of this conversation. And if you enjoyed our little chat, make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel and wherever you're listening to this podcast. That way you're going to be keeping up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Waldman also does his own podcast, the RSP Cast, where he does a lot of deep dives in a very similar way, even longer than this. I would highly recommend you check that out as well. But thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today and every single day. That's the best way to make sure that you're getting your daily opportunity to bear down.